gaining in mass. So somehow Mother Nature has this way of equalizing itself and not allowing the sea levels to rise dramatically. But there are changes that are happening in Antarctica at a very quick pace, and we'll get into that. Although no country holds indisputable title over any part of Antarctica, 7 nations do have territorial claims. But this sovereignty is not internationally recognized. Here is the wedge that Argentina claims. And up in the top left corner, you can see where Ushuaia is, where we sailed down to these islands, the Pan-Antarctic Islands of the Palmer Peninsula, before we actually got to the continental landmass. So these claims still have all their bases in them. There are 6 countries: Argentina, Chile, UK, Norway, New Zealand, Australia, and France. Why 3 European nations claim a continent on the other side of the globe is curious. But from 2007 till 2009, the UK, Chile, and Argentina all filed for rights to Antarctica seafloor. So they are looking to do more exploration, drilling, and exploiting for minerals. But I'll explain why that's probably not going to work, because they have there is an Antarctica Treaty that came out in 1961. All countries do agree that Antarctica should be reserved for peace, prohibiting nuclear explosions, and guaranteeing the freedom of science, and that is written in the Antarctica Treaty. This is a map of the bases that are down there, and these are some that we went and visited: Palmer, Vernansky, King George Island. The first base we went to was the Arktowski base on King George Island, and boy, was that a relief to see that. Here's some pictures I took. You can see just the natural beauty is just so spectacular. 3 colors you see primarily: blue of the ocean, blue of the sky, white of the clouds, white of the glaciers, and black of the mountains. It's devoid of all the primary colors except for blue. And it occurred to me one day that when I went scuba diving really deep one time in the Sinai, you lose all the primary colors except blue as well. So it is this alien-like planet that so very few people go to. We ran the numbers, and it's 0.002% of the human population have ever been to Antarctica. It's virtually uninhabited. It's ice-covered landmass. It is the highest elevation continent in the world, and it has all these weird, quirky features, like 4 different poles. You've got your geographic South Pole, where the Amundsen Scott Research Station is. You have the South Geomagnetic Pole, where the southern lights occur, and I'll talk about that a little later. You have the pole of relative inaccessibility, which is the point that is farthest away from any landmass, the coastline, or any civilization. And then you have the South Magnetic Pole. And this too, like the Northern Magnetic Pole, is racing out of the continent. It's moving very quickly away from Antarctica, just as it is in the North Pole. Now, moving very quickly towards Siberia. Quickly, I mean, if it moves even a slight degree in 1 year, that's quick in geological terms. So we went to one of the 91 active volcanoes. This is a place called Deception Island, named because there's an underwater rock in that channel called the Neptune Bellows that has sunk many ships. Even recently, they're still hitting it. You go shipwreck in Antarctica and you're in big trouble. You might be waiting a while for a rescue. Although there are some bases around there and then others that have been closed. There's Emily and our other American friend, Luke. We were exploring out on that sandy peninsula there where the sand was steaming. And if the tide wasn't going out, we could have sat in the water and taken a hot spring. So it's a land of these great contrasts. And these 91 active volcanoes, they're going to play into the narrative of Antarctica here real soon. Some of the science that's being done down there is collecting meteorites. And because a few glaciologists discovered the first concentration of Antarctica meteorites only in 1970. So this is a very new science, but they go down there every year and look for them. Because Antarctica is just this giant white tableau of ice. Whatever falls there throughout the year is still there. Unlike the oceans or the forests or elsewhere where you might not be able to tell, any rock they find on the surface is a meteorite. This is what it looks like when they find one. They go in there with hermetically sealed bags, they never touch them, and they send them off to the Johnson Space Center. This is a meteorite NASA retrieved from the La Paz ice field, and researchers have uncovered grains of stardust that formed even before our own sun came into existence. What's more, the grain of material sheds insight into how the whole solar system has formed. This is the most famous one that's ever been found. The researchers say that this came from Mars, that it's actually very microscopic life forms. And I'll quote what the researchers say. A very small set of meteorites are pieces of the moon and Mars knocked loose by giant impacts and sent on a collision course with Earth. Among these is the now famous ALH 84001 meteorite. Some NASA researchers have suggested that this Martian sample may have traces within it of ancient biological activity on Mars. So in a way, this is the drip, drip, drip of disclosure. Remember when this story came out about 10, 15 years ago? It was, wow, proof that there's life from outer space. So they're conditioning us slowly to this idea that there is life out there. This is really fascinating. This morning I did an interview with the Edge of Wonder guys, and they were really blown away with this whole concept of Antarctica being volcanically active, of having over 2 miles of ice over the polar plateau, and the possibility of these large domes under the ice. Not only domes, but subglacial lakes sit at the base of the large ice sheets and retain liquid year-round, as opposed to Antarctica's frozen lakes. There are rivers, there are lakes, and there are real big lakes, which I'm going to show you here in a minute. These subglacial lakes were only discovered in the late 1960s, and one area here with this high concentration of lakes, they call it the lake region. And that's all 2 miles plus under the ice. They find them using sonar. And the biggest is Lake Vostok. How many of you heard of Lake Vostok? Yeah, a few of you. It is in the top 10 largest lakes of the world, and hardly anybody knows about it. In fact, it was only discovered fairly recently and just probed down into it in 2012. But it was the Russians who have a base there, and it's about the size of Lake Ontario. It's about the size of one of our Great Lakes. They got down there in 2016 with a clean sample, and what they pulled up was some biological material that has never before been seen. So this is still a very new and moving and fluid story. This is how they discovered it, with a satellite view determining that 2.2 miles under the ice was Lake Vostok. And it too has rivers that drain, and possibly these giant ice caves with air under them. So I think they're going to be drilling again this year. The season starts in late November, it ends in early March. And what they might find, what they're trying to find, is fish that live in the lake or other life that has been completely sealed off from the rest of the world for millions of years under the ice. So at that geomagnetic South Pole are the southern lights, down there called Aurora Australis. For a long time, the southern continent was presumed to exist all the way back to the ancient Greeks. They thought if all these land masses are in the top northern hemisphere, there has to be something below. So it's the first continent that was presumed to exist long before it actually was. Now, unlike our northern lights, where people can see them as far south as Montana and in Scandinavia, Siberia, of course Alaska and Canada, very, very few people see the southern lights because hardly anybody's down there during the winter. They actually occur all year round, but because the summers are virtually 24 hours of daylight, you can't see them in the day. So these were named auroras after the Roman goddess of the dawn. And millions of miles away, the sun produces electrically charged particles that are blown outward across the solar system in a continuous solar wind. You can see why the Vikings and other prehistoric people would have found the aurora very fascinating. It's not until recently do we know that these solar winds, they pass the Earth, and charged particles are attracted to the Earth's magnetic field and are drawn to the two geomagnetic poles. As these particles pass through the atmosphere, they interact with atoms, molecules, and ions in the upper atmosphere, causing them to release as light. That's how the northern and southern lights are created. And since it's so far away, so few people see it, but they come in different colors, of course. Green, blue, sometimes a little yellow. Really mysterious. I saw it one time in Montana, and it was just amazing. They move so subtly, slowly, but it can be seen April through October in the darkest months at the geomagnetic South Pole. Well, we got to see 6 research stations, this being the American Palmer Station. The guy on my right there, he's the chief. It took me a while to get us permission to come ashore. Basically, you communicate with the bases. Here's a picture of the Argentinian brown base. There's our boat. So we take a dinghy in, we come ashore, they give us a tour. Everybody's got these signs of how far away. See a couple penguins down there hanging out. Come right up to the penguins. They have no fear of humans. You can come right up with your iPhone, and they're like, get out of my way. You're blocking my scene. They're just not used to seeing humans at all, which is quite fascinating. One of the coolest things about being down there was seeing the abundant wildlife. So because there are no permanent residents in Antarctica, although there are some people there year-round, the winter population, as I mentioned, is only 1,000 people. The researchers in the summer gets up to closer to 4,000, but by far the largest amount of people that go down there are tourists, just like Emily and I, but only those 3 months or so during the season. One of the most cutting-edge research projects being done at the South Pole Station, and we're going to talk about this in detail, but I want to tell you about some of the real science that is going down there. Is they're working on this experiment called the Ice Cube Neutro Detector, which is buried over a kilometer into the ice. And it's highly sensitive and can detect any kind of earthquakes, vibrations in the world, but also air pollution. They're monitoring all kinds of rays, including gamma ray bursts, and I'm going to discuss this in a minute. The team searches for ultra-high energy subatomic particles called neutrinos that have passed through the core of the Earth. Thus, the Earth becomes a telescope, and the ice cap is the detector. And so studying these neutrinos is the way it may increase our understanding of dark matter. So really things that affect all of us in the material world are some experiments that are going on down there in the South Pole. And here's these cosmic rays that are coming out of the Earth. This was just discovered about 2 years ago. Right before I was going down there, I talked to a fellow Antarctica researcher, Dr. Michael Sala. Said, what are some of the things you find really fascinating? He said this, that these cosmic rays are coming out of the Earth in Antarctica. And this could be because there is a giant cavity down there. Otherwise, cosmic rays generally come into the Earth. This was kind of funny. We were down there, and they said every new recruit has to watch John Carpenter's The Thing. And these are a couple clips I took out of the movie. There they are discovering a massive craft under the ice. And that was one of the things that Emily and I wanted to see, as if anybody knew about crafts under the ice. This is about all that grows down there, is some lichen, some mosses, and a few fungus. The seal down here on the right was told to me at New Year's Eve. We were at the Ushuaia Yacht Club party for New Year's Eve, and I was talking to this captain that's been down there for over 20 years. He said one of the most fascinating things is this seal. This is in the dry valleys near McMurdo. It's over 3,000 years old. It's literally freeze-dried, and they go there to study it because it's so old, and since it's so dry in the dry valleys, which I'll show you here, one of the driest places on Earth, no rain or snowfall, it's just landlocked, and moisture can't get there. As strange as it sounds, Antarctica is essentially a desert. The average yearly precipitation is only about 2 inches. And although covered with ice, Antarctica is the driest place on the planet, with an absolute humidity lower than the Gobi Desert. These remarkable dry valleys in Victoria Land came about when the Transantarctic Mountains were uplifted faster than the glaciers could cut their way through the sea. And so the glaciers were trapped behind the mountains, and then the dry winds kept the valleys free from snow. When we were in the Palmer Base, they had this fossil on the left on display. And this is a plesiosaur, similar to the Loch Ness Monster, which once survived and lived down there. Now, of course, dinosaurs are reptiles, they're cold-blooded. They would not be able to survive there today, thus proving that Antarctica has moved. It has shifted down from temperate climates to its current position in the frozen state that it is. Up above the Beardmore Glacier is Mount Buckley, where 4 different Mesozoic finds have been collected. The early Triassic assemblage is dominated by synapsids, an extinct group of animals that link primitive reptiles to mammals. And in Antarctica, there are 2 species that are completely unique to Antarctica. 2 dinosaurs only found there. One is like this giant salamander, also found at the Beardmore Glacier. This guy was really interesting. He's the one who told us about the other base in Antarctica. He's at the Brown base that I showed you a minute ago, and he said that some of his comrades at the Belgrano 2 base had a sighting of UFOs. So in our line of questioning, we did find that some people had some things of a paranormal nature to discuss, and they were very reluctant to tell Emily and I about this sighting at the other Argentinian base, but we finally got it out of this guy here. But he's a marine biologist, and he is studying the ice fish. And this fish is very, very unique. For one, it's only found in Antarctica, like some other species down there, but it has no hemoglobin. It has white or translucent blood. It's a fish that has adapted to the subarctic ice water and can live in below freezing water. They're the only vertebrate fish that do not have hemoglobin in their blood. Instead of having red blood like most other fish, it is white or translucent. Other traits that make this fish unique are the bones are reduced in weight with less calcium, and the glycoproteins in their body contain a kind of anti-freeze protein in their blood that keeps them from freezing to death. They're hugely important to the animals that feed on them, such as penguins and seals. They're also one of the indicator species that if things start happening to them, it will have repercussions all the way through the food chain. And things are happening there. When Bob Farrell took us on a tour of the Palmer Base, he said, make sure to take a picture of the painting that was done in the 1980s by an artist that was stationed down there. And basically, there was a huge glacier that had extended out and over this island, which just became exposed a couple years ago when the ice bridge broke off. And islands are becoming discovered all the time. And I'll show you with some old maps, like the Peary-Reese map at the end of this presentation, how there are many islands that have yet to be discovered. So when it broke off, they needed a name. It broke off on Pi Day, and so now it's called Pi Island. But when it was painted in the 1980s, they never even knew it existed. So many things could be under the ice that nobody really knows about. And so here's some of these penguin colonies. At first it was such a joy to see a couple penguins. We're like, oh, get a picture of them. And then we started going into these massive colonies, and it's just huge. This is me taking a picture of the mother and the baby just 2 feet away, and she wasn't perturbed at all. Other species like the Anomalies are declining. These are cold water penguins, where the other chinstrap and gentoo are coming down and feeding in their areas. So they're competing for resources where before they never did. Now, I love history and I love travel and everything associated. One of the greatest adventure stories of all time was the race to the South Pole. And Raoul Amundsen was the first person to reach the South Pole on December 14th, 1911, so it's only 108 years ago. Humans made it down there. Amundsen, the Norwegian, he used dogs and dog sleds to bring their supplies down. Where the Scott party, and this is a picture of them, when they reached the South Pole and they saw that the Norwegians were there, and you can see the sunken look on their face, they were pulling their supplies. They did not use dogs. And they were so enamored with all the fossils on Mount Buckley that one of the reasons their expedition failed is because they were carrying so much weight. And they got stuck in a storm just a couple kilometers from their next depot of food. All 5 of them died. And they were buried in the ice, and they're still there. They're on the Ross Ice Shelf, and they will eventually be, their bodies will be ejected from the ice. So a very tragic tale, but just going to show that this is one of the most inhospitable places in the world. Well, the second half of this presentation is about the speculation about what might be down there. What exactly that Emily and I were going to look for. This is a map that was done by Linda Moulton Howe, had a whistleblower named Brian S. And from what I've heard, I've listened to his interviews a couple times now, he is very credible. He was down there, there's pictures of him, and I could tell from his description and times and distances that he was there. And the most intriguing thing he talked about is this presumed massive hole in the ice just to the side of the South Pole, as you can see there. And in fact, we know that there is absolutely a no-fly zone on that side of the South Pole. That Brian S. had to fly to another base up there, and he defied orders of going all the way around it, and he saw the massive hole. And he said that there was even a road that snowcats could drive out of the base and go to the hole, and there was a road leading down into it. Admiral Byrd said the hole was so huge you could fly a plane into it, come back and around, and still get out safely. So perhaps these are real, perhaps they're Photoshop. I can't vouch for them. I was just looking for them. There's many, many other pictures similar to that on the internet of this massive hole that can be seen from outer space. So it's that big. And at this point of the South Pole, the ice is over 2 miles deep. So if this goes down to the bedrock, it's quite a distance. One problem that researchers have at the South Pole, because it's so dry and so high in elevation, is static electricity. So everything you touch is you're just shocking yourself. And it's quite difficult to be there in 4 months of total darkness. So the other mystery is this area called New Schwabenland. This is what the Germans had mapped out and had claimed for the Third Reich. All the names here are these mountains: Mullig, Hoffmann, Range. They all have German names. And the most important is this area here called the Schumacher Ponds. These are geothermically active ponds that a pilot named Schumacher was able to land a seaplane in, and they went out and explored and found some places under the ice, presumably, that Admiral Dolence, who actually surrendered for the Third Reich in 1945, but in 1943 he said, "We have created an impregnable fortress for our Führer in the land of eternal ice." And this is where the New Berlin base is presumed to be, point 211. This is a map from the expedition, and you see these oak leaves on the side. These are the swastika, and the oak leaves clearly reveal that the Thule Society had paternity. So there were occult purposes for going down there, and it is there on the map of New Schwabenland to see. If I were ever to go back, this would certainly be on the top of my list. Love to go down there with a Geiger counter and go to this area, and I'll show you exactly where it is. This is where the Nazi New Berlin base would be, right there in those mountains. And in the late 1950s, the US was involved with high-altitude nuclear bomb detonations. It's called Project Argus. You can read about it on Wikipedia. It's one of the only nuclear bomb tests that's still classified as top secret. So it's presumed that it was in the late 1950s, during Project Argus, that they finally were able to bomb this area and get the last remnants out of there. So I'd love to go there with a Geiger counter and see if there's anything radioactive or any remains of the base, because Operation High Jump took place with Admiral Byrd to go to this area. And this is about where New Schwabenland is. He got in there 2 months into the expedition, and they were confronted with some kind of craft that came out of the water, confronted the Armada, sank a ship called the USS Maddox, and presumably it's still underwater. I actually talked to a underwater salvage crew about doing a dive down to try to find the Maddox and see if it was cut by a laser in half. So these craft were not able to be shot down. They laser beamed one of our ships in half And Admiral Byrd's like, I'm out of here. So check this out. I found this map was during the Cold War era. That's the map for West Germany. They never left after World War II. The Neumayer base is a permanently manned base. And then this Conan base, I'm going to show you something really strange about that in a minute. But here's the Belgrano 2 base. That's where they had the UFO sighting late last year. And here's that weirdness at the Conan base. If there was ever a craft under the ice, this is the best I could find. Now, if you go to the Wayback Machine on Google Earth, and the coordinates are exactly the same as the Conan base, 2013, this is what you'll see. An airstrip, presumably snowmobiles, and there's footpaths all around. But what is this? Nature doesn't create these perfectly straight lines and symmetry of that. Now, if you go there right now to the same place, this is what you'll see. That something's poking up and creating these ice formations around it. And so this secret expedition of the Nazis in 1938-39, I think they found this. I think this is one of the reasons why they went down there. It was dispatched to Antarctica by Field Marshal Hermann Göring himself, who was interested in claiming this territory and protecting Germany's growing whaling fleet. This is the cover story. But I think they knew that there was something down there that they wanted to investigate. They dropped these 1.5 meter long darts with swastikas on it. And people still go down there to try to find them. Perhaps the Nazis discovered this anomaly under the ice, and the Conan Station is the summer German research station which exists to this day, and kind of makes you wonder what is the continuing research down there. Well, also on Google Earth you can find what look like crafts under the ice, perfectly round crafts that you can see in Google Earth. That could also be something under the ice. And possibly these pyramids. I found 3 different locations where you have these pyramids you see here on the left. One of them is in the Shackleton Range, and then this one below Mount Epperly. Now, I talked to a Antarctica expedition group, and they say, oh yeah, we know that one. We fly over it all the time. I said, well, do you think it's a pyramid? I said, well, no, they call it a nun attack. Just an attractive mountain coming under the ice. And I said, well, has anybody gone there to climb it or investigate? It's like, no, we never did that. So there's another thing I'd like to do. If I were ever to go back, flying this time, to be sure. We talked on Edge of Wonder this morning about the Fitbit data dump. Do you remember, the Strava exercise app? I use it on bike rides and stuff. Gives you good GPS coordinates. You get one of the wearables called Fitbit. Well, a couple years ago they had this big data dump. Well, this is actually now a slide that I can debunk. Because this airstrip is used by this Antarctic logistics expedition group on the Union Glacier. And I was just there in Salt Lake City in August at their office here in the States. I also went to the one in Punta Arenas because we might be able to go down with the film crew and produce a segment for Nat Geo. So I was investigating this stuff, and I said, well, what about the heat signatures near the Union Glacier? And she said, well, we did this triathlon. We did this running race, and that was the map of the running race. So some of these things do become revealed with an explanation. Just like, what are all these guys doing down there? You got John Kerry going down on election day. You'd think he might have better things to do, helping his party get the nomination for president in 2016. No, he's in Antarctica, and I have a friend that worked at McMurdo they call it MacTown, is the largest base in Antarctica. It's an American base. And he was there working when John Kerry showed up. And it was a big hubbub because he came in on State Department plane, but he went missing for 3 days. They took off inland Antarctica, didn't say where they were going, came back, resupplied, and then off they went. Same year, Buzz Aldrin went down there. That's him out right below John Kerry. And he had this cryptic tweet that says, "We are all in danger. It is evil itself." Now some people have said that was spoof Twitter. Can't prove it either way, but it just brings more intrigue into the story. And he flew down with Russian airplanes. You can see the Russian script on the plane there. You have Patriarch Kirill going down to bless that little chapel. He went all the way around the world, an elderly man, to bless that tiny little chapel. Well, each one of these individuals, there's a little backstory. And the backstory on Patriarch Kirill, who's like the Pope of the Eastern Orthodox religion, went down there on Putin's orders to pray at the Ark of the Covenant, which came through Saudi Arabia, had some problems. This is the conspiracy story about that. And they had to find a place in the earth to deposit it. They put it in Antarctica, and he came down to make good with God, or something like that. This is King Carlos of Spain, Prince Harry of the UK. Each one of them went down. Cover story why they did, as well as other elite that go down there. Well, this is the picture that I had from 2012. It looks very, very real, but I'm afraid this could be other disinformation. And the telltale sign is that helicopter there. When I talked to the logistics crew, they said there is no helicopter like that in Antarctica. Could be Greenland, could be the Arctic region, but this is the rumored 3-mile long craft under the ice. Unfortunately, we could find nobody down there that knew anything about it. So again, this is in the speculation part of this talk. You go on Google Earth and you can find these entrances. Look at that one on the left. That's not natural. It's some kind of massive entry, and it's located here. Not far away is another one. You can't see it too well in that picture, but another entry point. Underground ET base. Something fashioned by humans. For those of you who want to do some homework, there's the coordinates. Go look it up. You'll see it. This is presumably Admiral Byrd on the left with some kind of mysterious stele that they found with some script and strange design. Linda Moulton Howe just started talking about this image on the right. Interview that she did, and spoke about it on Contacting the Desert. Her and I and Dr. Sala were on a panel together on Antarctica. It's very intriguing. You see those, what look like submarines popping up somewhere near the shore, and some kind of excavation of some giant orb. Hard for me to say if any of these are real or not. This is just speculation. And what's interesting about Google Earth, there are clearly areas that they mask. Didn't even do a very good job with this one. You can see the mountain range on the left there, just covered right over. But then they give us some other nuggets, like these. Once again, nature does not create perfect right angles, perfect symmetry. And look at this, it's like steps up to a step pyramid with snowmobile tracks around it, and this one too, with a certain degree of symmetry, looking like these had been fashioned. Well, in 2012, a satellite image took these pictures of this mysterious oval shape on the left, and it is in one of the most remote regions of Antarctica. It's 400 feet across, appears with too many perfect geometric shapes to be random or natural, but appear to be crafted by an intelligent people. The image on the right looked like step pyramids in a plan of a square city, and you just don't get Mother Nature creating anything that geometrically perfect. This is another picture of some of the species that overlay from Gondwana land, and both Ernest Shackleton and Captain Robert Smith found coral beds and plant fossils on their early explorations of the trans-Antarctic mountains, clearly indicating that Antarctica was not always covered in ice. Since then, much more fossil evidence of pre-glacial periods have been uncovered, including petrified wood, sometimes in pieces as long as 20 meters. We have a petrified forest right here in Arizona. They have one down there in Antarctica too. Fossil pollen and fossils of animals, but they're much less common. And there you can see a couple examples, some of the exotic creatures that had crossed over in the continents when they were all connected together in Gondwana or Pangaea. These fossils provide evidence of a connection between the parts of the ancient continent to this massive supercontinent that once existed, and gives indirect information about the changes in the Antarctic climate over millions of years. This is the rift zone. These are the trans-Antarctic mountains here, extend up. It's all volcanically active. Where you see those red lines are where most of the volcanoes are. And this is a map that I discovered that was also created by the Germans. It says here in the caption, the deep sea trench discovered by previous German expeditions, found to be of a volcanic origin, discovered to run right through the new German colony of New Schwabenland, revealing itself in the form of warm water lakes, caves, crevices, and ice tunnels, most of which were found suitable for human habitation with the simple addition of electric lighting. The trench is an excellent deep sea route for U-boats. Keep that in mind when I show you a map of Antarctica without the ice, and you'll see how you could penetrate deep into the continent with the U-boats. And that would be one brave crew to do that. Well, Emily and I just were driving down Patagonia. It's a big, long country, wild, vast distances, and we pulled into Porto San Julian. This is a map of how it really is. This is a map of Magellan, who ported there 500 years ago this winter. This is the 500th anniversary of Magellan discovering the Straits of Magellan, which bear his name. And there's all sorts of celebrations that are going to occur. And you can see from Magellan's map that they thought Terra del Fuego connected to Antarctica. And it wasn't until Sir Francis Drake went through the Magellan Straits, got through to the Pacific side, and then got blown off course all the way back, and he could tell with his logistics that he had returned to the Atlantic. And he was the first one to say that indeed Terra del Fuego does not connect to Antarctica. But he didn't discover Antarctica yet. Antarctica was not discovered until 1821 by whalers and sealers going down there to exploit the wildlife that Captain Cook also circumnavigated the Southern Ocean and reported how abundant the life was down there. Well, here's that Kerry Reese map showing a whole bunch of islands to the south of South America, which some of these may still be under the ice. You can see how this map was created in 1519, and you have the outline of South America. Well, Magellan didn't even make it down there till the next year, but somehow Kerry Reese already knew what the Americas look like, especially South America. And up here you can see Africa, a little bit of Spain on the top there. And on the map itself, it says that he got his information from other maps, quote, dating from the time of Alexander the Great. Some of the islands of Antarctica depicted on the map were not discovered until the early 20th century. This is another old map called the Bocce map from the 18th century, which depicts Antarctica with a water channel right through the middle of the ice-covered continent. And here's that map of Antarctica free of ice. Indeed, it is 2 continents. You got West Antarctica, where we went and visited on the top left there, and then East Antarctica, which is one of the oldest land masses in the world, over 3 billion years old. Amazingly, there are 2 main water corridors under the ice in Antarctica that nearly connect. Mainstream history teaches that they were only first discovered in 1821. Yet here's that New Schwabenland area, and that channel there goes many hundreds of miles under the ice. That could have also been part of the hiding place for the Third Reich with their new Berlin base. The highest point in Antarctica is only 14,856 feet, called Vinson Massif, and that is in western Antarctica, the more mountainous part of the continent, which is only 700 million years old. It's quite new compared to the 3 billion year old East Antarctica. And one other map, this 1531 Phineas Map of Terra Australis Incognita, depicts Australia and Antarctica as one supercontinent. Antarctica was known centuries before, as I mentioned, from explorations, and has already been measured precisely. We can see in this one published in 1531 by Phineas, the Phineas Map, that he was a mathematician and geographer, and he studied different types of spherical projection or cordiform. This map shows around the South Pole a large continent called Terra Australis. Well, when you compare it with the ice map on the bottom here, it's almost a perfect depiction of Antarctica with the ice. Fits right over that landmass. So this Phineas map is an accurate depiction of what the continent looks like, completely covered in ice. Combined with those other maps, just adds a little more intrigue to the Antarctica tale. Now, this is what Corey Good has been talking about. He said that there is an archaeological dig where they're finding megalithic buildings and pulling out woolly mammoths. These are artist rendition. I can only tell you what he says. But that Antarctica had once been Atlantis, and replete with these giant cone-headed creatures they call the pre-Adamites. These giant bodies found in Antarctica show the unique body and head shapes. Interestingly, it looks like they got kind of Egyptian clothes on. So take it or leave it, that's what Corey Good says is going on down there. And he also says there's these massive bases down there. The circles you see are the 6 locations he has identified as under ice massive bases. And this is another artist rendition of what it would look like. The steam there are the geothermal features coming through one of those volcanic rift zones. And Corey Good says he went to one of these. He reported that he got to see actually 5 of the working underground bases belonging to what he calls the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate, a corporate-run secret space program based out of Antarctica. Well, there's one last story to all this I find very, very interesting. And this is a very remote island. It is actually one of the most remote islands in the world. It's called Southern Thule. Remember, Germans had a fascination for the Arctic region. They thought that ancestor races came from the inner Earth, Hyperborean or Thule. They had the Thule Society, and this island happens to have that same name. Geographically, there's your Palmer Peninsula. It's located right there. So what would an island like this be of such interest to the British, who went down there in 1982 during the Falkland Wars? The map on the right shows the two divisions that went down to fight in the Falkland Wars. It's from Wikipedia. And of course we know the history of the Falkland Wars, a very one-sided war. The Argentinians basically got massacred by the more advanced British Navy. But they were also interested in these South Sandwich Islands. That's what you see on Google Earth, and you can see again, there's like some masking of the island. They don't want you to see certain portions of it. Well, the 1982 United Kingdom military campaign to recapture the Falkland Islands from Argentina also had another prize, the extremely remote South Thule Island, which seemingly had little strategic value, or did it? There was a very remote base in the lee, that is the southern east coast of the same island. A year after war, the British completely destroyed the base. All that are left are the two automatic weather stations on Thule Island and Zavadski. To the northwest of Zavadski Island is Protector Shoal, a submarine volcano. And in fact, the Falkland Wars ended on South Thule Island. This is a photo from a British newspaper at the time. The newspaper caption below there reads, "A film of ice clings to the HMS Endurance's hull as she lies off southern Thule after the Argentinian surrender. Royal Marines raised the Union flag over the island for the first time since 1976. A permanently manned Argentinian research station was located on Thule Island from 76 to 82. And that's what it looks like. And the British destroyed it. On one of the most remote places in the world. Maybe there was something very valuable there that they wanted. That maybe this is what Falklands Wars was all about. Argentina claimed these islands from 1938 and challenged British sovereignty. In fact, all over southern Argentina, you see all these signs, posters, memorials, quite like our Vietnam Memorial with all the dead soldiers from the Falkland Wars. And in fact, don't call them the Falklands. You'll get in a barroom fight in Argentina. They're Isla Maldivas. That's their name for them. And they don't like the British name. But the Brits have hung on to the Falkland Islands. They're still protected by the British. You go to the city of Stanley in the Falkland Islands, and it's very much like you're going to northern Scotland or something. They have voted recently to stay in the Union, so they want to be British. Well, here's what it was all about. The southern battle for these islands was called Operation Keel. And the Argentinians were studying the black goo. Anybody heard of the black goo? Yeah, about half you guys, okay? So Operation Keyhole was a British special operation to recapture Thule Island and the South Sandwich Islands during Operation Corporate. That was one of the names of it. In the 1982 Falklands War, the operation took place June 20th, 1982, under the threat of the Royal Marines Party. The ships cruising in front of the base, the Argentinians raised the white flag, not a shot was fired, and the final surrender of the war was signed in the war room of the Endurance with all commanders present. And this is what the black goo is. It is intelligent, it is living, and it's available in various forms. There are videos you can see online. I was trying to get some for this presentation. where they have a jar of it. It looks like tar or oil in a jar, and they bring another jar together, and then it activates. It wants to rejoin. The common narrative pertaining to the black goo is that it is an AI substance that can be used to rapidly clone any life form. It was brought to Earth by a benevolent ET group shortly after the Mount Toba eruption, 74,000 years ago. Mount Toba, Lake Toba, I visited it, is on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia. And at that time, the Lake Toba eruption plunged the Earth into a volcanic winter, eradicating an estimated 60% or more of the worldwide human population, most of whom may have been the surviving descendants of Lemuria. The fallout from the Toba eruption reduced the entire human population to possibly only a few thousand individuals. So some of the largest sports stadiums would have held all the humans alive on the planet 74,000 years ago, right after the Toba eruption. And with a reduction in the human population, according to geneticists, it does help us explain the similarity in all human DNA. Thus, the surface population of humans was very susceptible to a takeover by another species. The black goo was deposited on South Thule Island to be in a perpetual state of being frozen, and in one of the most remote corners of the planet to prevent it from escaping. The benevolent ET narrative to an intuitive human named Alec Newald continues, and Emily and I were reading this in Nexus magazine when we were down there. It just made my jaw drop. What a coincidence. There'd be a whole article about the black goo and South Thule Island when we were sailing over to Antarctica, not too far away. Quote, "It was a setback to have our project to South Thule shut down, even after our friends in Argentina tried to help. We have since moved to a new location where our work continues. It's not over yet. Perhaps one day you will know this, but never forget that we are not friends with the stars and the stripes." Now that could be interpreted as the US, of course, but also the Union Jack of the British stripes on their flag. It continues. This is an ET speaking to a experiencer. "If someone tells you that your ET brothers and sisters are coming to hold your hand to those that come to visit the stars and stripes, let it be said that there is danger in the air, for this could never happen." The Argentinian government was tasked in the mid-1970s to secure the entrance to an underground ET base on southern Thule, where they set up the Corbetta Uruguay station in '76. The Nexus magazine article called "Coevolution and Interplanetary Adventure," in a section on hidden ET bases in the Earth continues, states, quote, this is the alien talking to Alec Newald, "When we set up one of our bases in southern Thule, there was a good reason for this. Not only was it isolated, which suited our work, but it was also infected beneath the surface, what I would call a black plague. It is like a concentration of negative energy. We wanted to see if we could nullify this plague before it made its way to the surface by accident or design. It is easier to control it if it is kept in near 0 degree year-round, so it's best to work with it in colder regions on your planet. Heat appears to be its friend. If it were ever to be released into the tropics, I don't think we could deal with it." That's the end of the quote. And I could probably do a whole presentation on the black goo, because when it was brought back to the UK in the 1980s, it went to Marconi Laboratories and wreaked havoc. And many scientists that were working on it died mysteriously. It escaped into the sewer system and presumably has gotten loose today. Now what's so very interesting is we have the Morgellons disease, which is coming out, which is like a black goo that oozes out of the body, and this is on this timeline of only being diagnosed in the late 1990s. So there could be a correlation with this black goo coming out in the whole Falkland Wars that could have precipitated this from this escaping. Let's not go to the next slide here. What's going on? Anyways, just want to show you a couple final slides if I can get it. There it is. So this is a interesting picture. Remember at the beginning I showed you how the south geomagnetic pole, the magnetic pole is now moving off of Antarctica towards Australia. And the north magnetic pole is moving as well. If we were to experience a pole shift, the poles shift by 45 degrees. This was determined by Jacques Cousteau, who was doing some underwater diving off the Yucatan and found underwater caves with stalactites and stalagmites forming at 45-degree angles, showing that this cave had formed before the last pole shift. If it did, it's like 3 or 4 days of extreme activity on the surface, from volcanoes to tidal waves to earthquakes, where living near the coast would be quite deadly. Charles Hapgood, along with Albert Einstein, worked on the preface of this book called The Path of the Poles. Believed that the accumulation of ice at the North and South Poles would be the trigger for crustal displacement, geophysical pole shift. Einstein wrote the foreword to this book and explained the triggering mechanism as follows, quote, "In a polar region there is a continual depositation of ice, which is not symmetrically distributed around the pole. The Earth's rotation acts on these unsymmetrical deposit masses and produces centrifugal momentum that is transmitted to the rigid crust of the Earth. The constantly increasing centrifugal momentum produced in this way could trigger a pole shift." And see if we can get audio. This is our boat. There's Luke, the other American, doing a little duty, moving these growlers, the tiny icebergs, away. And too bad we don't get the audio. It's just me narrating. Well, I'll say, "Hey, look at these whales off the side there. They're awfully close from about me to you guys away." And you can just see the magnificence of the scenery of Antarctica, how absolute stark the contrasts are. Everything just covered in snow and ice. And these whales, which a marine biologist friend of mine saw the video when I posted online, they're called right whales. They are one of the most rare whale species in the world, nearly hunted to extinction, given that dubious name because they died in the right way. They floated to the surface instead of sinking. So they were a prize target when they could be found. And here he comes, right under our boat.
Right under.
Oh, there's my audio. Right under.
I did.
Yes, if I caught it on film. And then the three of them just disappeared. That was the weirdest feeling of all. It's kind of like a Moby Dick experience. There you can see what the boat looked like we were on. And at the very end, they send up a couple bubbles. But they just disappeared. It was pretty wild.
Amazing.
Just amazing. And there at the end, you can see some bubbles right there. Just kind of blowing up and saying hello. All right, that's it. That's my presentation. Thank you guys for coming.